This episode of the Linux Action Show is brought to you by the good-looking folks at GoDaddy.com. Use our code Linux and save yourself some cash. And welcome to the Linux Action Show, Season 19, Episode 1. My name is Chris, and joining me on the Skype line is Alan. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, man. Welcome back in your nice new 16:9 format, I might add. Looking quite nice. That's the Logitech C20? Is that what that is?
C910.
C910. I really like. I think it's got a really great picture quality. I mean, that's really impressive. That's nice. So
I'm quite impressed with the improvement over the Pro 9000.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for joining me today. We've got a big show. The Linux Action Show is biting off a big one. We're going to review Ubuntu 11.10, and for some crazy reason, we're also going to review Kubuntu 11.10. And at the end of this episode, we'll also release a virtual machine that you can download of Kubuntu 11.10 for VirtualBox if you just want to play around with it and kick the tires after our review. So that'll be available. Stay tuned for the details on that. Of course, we've also got a news segment with some sad news and also some awesome news that we'll share with you. But before we get to all of that, I want to share with you the Run's Linux pick this week. It was a contentious debate in the chat room this week. Not really, actually. This is actually pretty much I just kind of decided this was the one we were going to go with, but it's pretty great. HP's new cloud service runs Linux, and HP has actually chosen Ubuntu at that. This is HP's offering that they're going to sell to customers as like here's a cloud offering where you have all the components in the box to build your own application on top of a cloud service using that OpenStack cloud.
Because Dell does a similar thing. They're also a partner with OpenStack. And so, they're selling you, a pre-built cloud that you just buy and, put in the rack.
Yeah, and boy, this is a big win for Ubuntu, huh? I mean, holy moly.
I think it's a product of the fact that they made that cloud distribution version that has a lot of the, stuff you would only need for a desktop stripped out.
Yeah.
Even for a server, it's specifically designed to run in virtualization. So it has, a lot of the stuff that, doesn't actually matter to a virtualized machine taken out. Yeah. And, it's just stripped down, especially because when you're doing those virtual cloud machines, like virtual machines, sometimes you're only using 512 megabytes of RAM. And so you really want to maximize your use of that. Yeah.
Now, the other thing that's specifically, I think what you touched on here, Alan, I just want to go from that and just take that point a little bit further, is because Ubuntu did that distro ready for EC2, this whole offering now from HP is going to support Zen, VMware, Amazon EC2, the Rackspace platform, which I believe is Zen-based, Hyper-V on Windows, all of these different services that will be available through this HP offering, and then whatever virtual infrastructure you run it on, the virtual machine itself will be Ubuntu-based. So that's a pretty awesome win, and that's the Runs Linux for this week, because I thought that was pretty cool. All right. Now, we've got a massive show, including an awesome Android pick and a killer Linux desktop pick for you out there who have a bad memory. I feel you. But first, before we get to all of that, let's say good morning to the beautiful Danica Patrick over at GoDaddy.com. Now, everybody knows about GoDaddy.com, right? GoDaddy.com is the #1 domain name registrar in the world. The world, people. Do you know how freaking big the world is? And they're #1 at it. Kind of like we're #1 for Linux Action Show stuff. What's up? You know what I mean? We're #1 at Linux Action Show stuff.
They're not just #1. They're #1, and they're bigger than #2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 put together.
And the reason why that's actually a good thing is, A, they're kind of like the de facto standard in the industry, and B, you're never going to go wrong using GoDaddy, and if you use our code Linux at LINUX when you check out, you'll save 10% on your domain name purchase. And heck, you know what? If you want to rock some of their shared server hosting like we do, which, by the way, works great as like a cheap back-end mirror infrastructure, all those kinds of things. Dude, if you're getting shared hosting, use our code Linux20. 20, man, you'll save 20%. That's what the 20 stands for. Plus, you get to type in Linux and put it in all caps. That way you're shouting at GoDaddy, Linux! Yes. Linux! I mean, might as well shout it while you're saving money.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, GoDaddy.
The main reason I use them is the 10% off code. It saves me a ton of money.
I would say that, but I don't get the discount. But I do like Danica Patrick, so that's good. All right, let's talk about the Android pick for this week. I'll be honest, it's a little self-serving, but Come on. How can I not pick this one?
Well, who wouldn't be interested in this if they're watching this show?
Dude, totes, right? And it came from a viewer, which is awesome. He's in the chat room right now. Shane, if you're in there, say holler and I'll throw up the chat room. But Shane Q is what he goes by in the chat room. And he's made this Jupiter broadcasting app for Android, which will play the live audio stream right on your device. Or, what I really like, will also just grab the all shows feed, RSS feed, so you can just in chronological order see all the different releases of the Jupiter broadcasting shows. Nice. So there you go. Yeah. So anyways, so thank you, Shane, for submitting that or for sending that in. And the APK download for that is in the show notes. You'll have to have side loading on because it's not in the marketplace. At least, not yet. But anyways, go check it out and let Shane know what you think. It's really awesome for him. I really appreciate people, because here's the honest to God's truth. It's like who you see on camera and there's a few people behind scene. That's it. That's all there is for the crew. There's no budget for hiring developers or contractors. There's no time to learn how to develop Android applications on my part. So without awesome people in our community doing that stuff for us, we wouldn't be available on these platforms. And that is a major disadvantage for Jupiter Broadcasting, because there's other networks our size, more profitable, that can hire developers. So we're kind of at a disadvantage there, and it's a competitive edge that we're missing. So I really, really, honestly, sincerely appreciate it when people hook us up like that, and can spend a little bit of their time making our stuff more accessible to people on all those devices. Because, dude, that's where you need to be these days. So thank you, Shane, for doing that, and go check out the links in the show notes if you want to load it on your Android device. Now, my universal pick this week, I believe there's a version that works on BSD, Alan. So I threw that in here. The one I'm talking about specifically seems to be targeted towards Linux, and it's a clone of this tool that's available for Windows and for the Mac and on pretty much every mobile device, but it is not available on Linux. And I'm talking about Evernote, which is a fantastic note-taking system. And dude, like on the Galaxy Tab here, you can be rocking it, and you can go in Evernote and you can take a picture of like a sign. And then when you submit that to the Evernote app and it uploads, it OCRs all of the text in that picture and then make the search indexable on your tab. Well, now you can use a desktop app on Linux, and it's called Nixie Note. This is a fork of the Nevernote project. Now, that's the other one I was talking about that I think works on BSD, Nevernote. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. But Nixie Note here is, it might look a little overwhelming to you video viewers, but that's kind of what Evernote is. And it's a serious tool. And it allows you to do file attachments, so you can say, you're working on a project and you have things like maybe an Excel spreadsheet or an open office doc or something like that you want associated with it. You can throw all of that in one note and then just sync it up. I don't know. It's pretty great. And I really like Evernote. It's just lacked any kind of Linux support. Honestly, I don't think there's an excuse for Evernote at this point with the size that they are and how many platforms they target. I don't believe there's a legitimate reason for them not to make a native Linux client themselves. But until that happens, Nixie Note is here, so you can go grab that.
When they're hitting so many platforms, it means their code is obviously quite portable. And so... Yeah.
And they have a whole set of database APIs and backends that this guy could tie into that they could tie into as well.
Yep.
It's one of those things, Alan. It's one of those things. And of course, you can also go find Nevernote, the original one. And Nevernote is also available for other platforms. So it might be a good way to go. Yeah? All right, Alan. Yeah. Let's do the news. All right, Alan. The top story on the news docket for this week was actually powered by our new Linux Action Show subreddit. People, please, I am pleading with you. Go to the new subreddit. Join it. There's like 54 people. Okay. That is a ridiculously small, tiny percentage of the Linux Action Show audience. So go over to Reddit and go to reddit.com/r/Linux Action Show and join up and submit stories. And I want to thank everyone who did. We actually, out of those 54 people, we got awesome rockstar submissions with great votes. Super awesome. So thanks everyone for doing that. Is really, really, really appreciate it. I really like that. Thank you.
And it's the best way to make sure that we don't miss something in the news, and to, if you want our opinion on something, or if there's a side of an issue that people aren't bringing up enough, right? If you tell us about it, then
what this guy is saying is the truth. If we miss something, I'm not saying it's your fault, but, I think...
But it is.
You probably already know. I mean, come on, right? Because, it's... Actually, the timing works out perfect, too, because Buzz is getting killed. and I have a small following on Buzz, and I would tag all of the stories in Reader, and then people in Reader would then have it ported to Buzz, and they could comment, and it was awesome, and people would give me insights, and then Google announced, oh, by the way, we're killing the Buzz. But the subreddit has swooped in like Spider-Man or Superman or something and saved the news day. So go over there and help save news lives, people. Jeez, what's the matter with you? All right. Speaking of things that are... Boy, it's not a good segue. I'm not even going to do it, but it's a little sad. You know where I was going with that. Actually, a legend in our industry passed away this last week, and specifically one hero for many of us Unix and well, anybody. I mean, shit. Let's not kid ourselves.
Anything. Period.
If you're watching this show or enjoying content on the web or programs or like things like Unix, you owe this man a thank you. And it's Dennis Ritchie, the father of C and co-developer of Unix, has died. Yes. And it's sad news. It's unfortunate because he's made a huge impact, and it's made me realize that we're kind of reaching a time where some of these original pioneers of our industry are going to start passing away.
Yeah, and they were a great resource, and it's going to suck to not have them anymore.
I know. I feel like, how do we go forward without some of our original leaders who really saw the future and saw, even the simplest things that have made such a huge difference that, it's a sad thing. And, it's made me reflect a little on the things that Richard Stallman has said lately. Yeah. And his comments on the passing of Steve Jobs. And I just thought, Dennis died after RMS made his comments, and it made me realize that, Richard Stallman is only going to be with us for so long himself.
Yeah.
And it's just unfortunate that I think what he's going to, be remembered for is kind of being a crude opportunist.
Right, but at the same time, his comments weren't wrong. Look at the press coverage that Steve Jobs got compared to Dennis Ritchie.
RMS was, RMS didn't have anything to say about that. RMS was just bad-mouthing Steve Jobs, which, again, like you said, he's not wrong.
Right.
It's opportunist, though. I mean, out of everything else, despite the crude way it was formed, it could have been formed much better, much more intelligently, one that wouldn't shock people, wouldn't scare people away, wouldn't make people go, what the hell? Because that was a big part of the reaction. He could have phrased it much more,
but then it wouldn't have got the attention it did.
That's why I think he's an asshole, because he used the death of someone as an opportunity to promote himself and his shock message. He knew that the moment was there to seize, to be crude, to get people talking and shock them, and he took it. And I think at the root of everything else, that's the part I like the least about what RMS said. And now that Dennis Ritchie has passed away, and we start to lose, and I start thinking about how we're going to lose these pioneers. One day we'll lose Richard Stallman, and I'll be sitting on the show, and I'll be saying, man, Richard Stallman, he did a lot of amazing things that fundamentally changed the technology industry forever. But he was also kind of a big dick, right? That's what people will say when RMS dies now, and that's.
But at the same time, it's like when we see that, Dennis Ritchie kind of doesn't get any fanfare compared to what Steve Jobs did, and he obviously did a lot more for the industry and the world than Steve Jobs ever did.
Oh, sure. And you may be able to argue the same for RMS, right?
Yeah, it's possible.
And it's just, I just wish he would have said it better. And I didn't really care as much at the time. I thought, oh yeah, that's just RMS being RMS, whatever. I don't really care. And in fact, we didn't even talk about it on the show. I cared so little. I just thought, okay, whatever. But then, in reflection on this, I thought, there's some people like Dennis Ritchie who had real class. There were, really good guys that made a huge difference in a way that is respectful. You know what I mean?
And his books were, such a part of most computer science classes anywhere. Yeah. And just the way he wrote, it was so
personal,
but also clear. Like there was never any excess words. It was just exactly what you needed. It was
I love that.
The same ideas that he put into when he wrote the C programming language.
And I'm not the only person who's a little upset about this, of course. There's been a lot of news reaction to RMS. But there's also a blog post here by a former Free Software Foundation member, and he goes on to talk about while he's become so offended by some of the things Richard Stallman has done, and he's quit. Now, my point isn't here to trash Richard Stallman. My point is for everyone to reflect on this and just think about it. There's different ways to handle things, and in a community that's as volcanic as the open source community, I don't know, maybe we could, maybe our leaders could choose better words so that way the rest of the tone is set a little more appropriately. So that way we can get some work done. You know what I mean? Instead of fight with each other. Because all that kind of negative energy does is just make people more hateful. And that doesn't get anything really accomplished, especially in a community where the goal of open source is collaboration and working together. It's just so frustrating. But what are you going to do? What are you going to do, Alan? Let's talk about something kind of interesting. All right? Let's move on. Let's talk about LibreOffice and how it's getting A, pimped, and B, coming to the web. This is actually a significantly...
And Android, though.
And, HTML5. So if you can support HTML5, you're going to be able to run a web-based version of LibreOffice. Is this blowing your mind or what?
They're not going to have a native Android one?
Well, yeah, they are. They're also going to work on a new UI, they say, specifically for mobile devices. But this that they're showing here is anything that supports HTML5 Canvas is going to be able to, I believe, run this web-based version.
The web one, yeah.
Yeah, so that's
the web one's going to have some collaboration stuff, right?
Oh, God, I would love to have a super challenger to Google Docs.
Mm-hmm.
We're watching, the people who are listening, which is the majority of the audience, so I understand. We're watching a video presentation over on omgubuntu.co.uk, and it looks like they're running the entire application, except for if you look up above it, it says it's a Firefox window, and they're on localhost port 8080. And they're right now manipulating a graphic inside the OpenOffice doc editor. It looks like the full application, it even has window borders and everything.
Oh, nice. But I think having it for Android and iOS will be a big deal because, documents on portable devices have never been that great, right? And, your Windows phone had Office on it, but it was not that useful. And so having, especially with bigger things like the tablets now, where you might actually be, doing some stuff with documents rather than just viewing them.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's interesting to see now that LibreOffice has branched off onto its own and isn't being controlled so much by a commercial company, but is more of a grassroots open source community. How this is a huge radical direction change, but one that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, well, that's what open source projects have the advantage over projects that are run by corporations in that, or even just large groups, right? When you have the smaller group of dedicated people, it's easier to change direction and go down a path.
It seems like they even have the OpenOffice spread, or I'm sorry, the LibreOffice. Boy, that's a bad habit. It takes me forever to change my vernacular. I still call. Anyways. But my last kind of comment on this is, I guess I'm a little skeptical that they're also making. Well, I guess it depends on how they do it, but I'm a little skeptical that they're making mobile versions and that they're going to do totally radically new UIs, unless. I bet it's going to be mobile versions that have UIs that sit on top of this HTML5 version of it.
Yeah.
That would be actually doable.
That's what their plan is, but I guess it depends how many people they have on the project and how long it will take them to actually to get it to a usable state and to get it to, an actual general release state.
Well, now here's what's interesting. According to OMG Ubuntu, this is the porting, at least to the web version, I believe, I'm not sure which version specifically, but it's being carried out by a single Finnish developer. Tor Lukvist, I'm sorry, but he's actually pretty well known for porting GIMP to Windows. So the guy that's taking this on formerly ported GIMP to Windows. So, I mean, that's sort of an interesting...
But then it's still just one guy.
Yeah, but maybe it's doable. I don't know. I don't know how much work it is.
But, if they have the giant goals of getting to the web, Android, iOS, or trying to challenge Google Docs, they're going to need more than one developer.
That's why I'm a little skeptical.
Yeah.
Hopeful.
So it's nice to see them go in a direction, and maybe it'll catch some attention, and they'll get more developers.
Yeah, and man, you get that on the web version, you get that collaboration going, and you give us a good open source competitor to Google Docs, and probably one. I bet you it'll be based on the way this guy had it running. He was at localhost. If we could do like JupiterBroadcasting.com/docs, and like all of the Jupiter Broadcasting team members could log in, and we could dump Google Docs, I think we'd all do that in a heartbeat, right?
For sure.
I mean, Google Docs is just
Google Docs.
Yeah, Google Docs has got plenty of issues. It's just also got plenty of advantages, but maybe they could fight that. And I think I secretly and not so secretly have just been repeating over and over on the show that I'm so worried about all of these cloud-based services that are completely locked off. They run on top of open source and they utilize free software top to bottom, and then you get to the user layer and well, it's all locked down proprietary code, and it's like Google Docs is fastly becoming the #1 competitor, if it's not already the #1 competitor to Microsoft Office, and it's a completely closed source product. And so if LibreOffice can step up to a web-based solution that's open source that you can host yourself, huge, huge advantage for them. Just meeting those qualifications alone will set them as a leader as an open source document software. So I hope they can pull it off.
They're picking up momentum like that. I think in the LibreOffice story, there's also a note about the French government switching all of their Office machines to use LibreOffice.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on to something pretty cool. I know a lot of you Linux Action Show fans out there love running your own services, things like Dropbox replacements and whatnot. One that's been mentioned on the show before is OwnCloud. Well, OwnCloud just released version 2.0 this last week. And if you're not familiar with OwnCloud, think one part Dropbox, think one part web front end to all your stuff. You could think of rolling your own iCloud in a sense, I guess, if you want to be cheeky about it. They've been working on it for 2 years, and now they have a web-based file browser that you can use. It looks pretty slick, so you can... and you can also use WebDAV from the KDE Conquer or Nautilus or Dolphin or whatever you happen to use. Here's what I really like, though. This is the part that's the bee's knees, in my opinion, is they give you this really nice HTML5e interface to your music collection, your video collections, your picture gallery on your own cloud server. So you throw OwnCloud on a box, open up an inbound port 80 or 443 to your router. Bob's your uncle. You don't need to use Amazon Cloud or Google Music.
No.
You just put it on your own file server and then just stream it right in the browser. It's got a little playback.
But also even just over your LAN to your media center.
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Really cool.
Yeah, it's so OwnCloud 2.0 is out, and it also supports things like you were just saying, Alan, streaming to Armorock and stuff like that. I really think OwnCloud is a pretty competitive product. I haven't got a chance to play with it, but this version...
I think there's a market out there for people that just want access to the stuff they have at home. Yeah, wherever they are.
And it also does things that are really nice, like calendar sync. And I believe it does things like CalDAV. So, Thunderbird, Evolution, hell, Google Calendar, pretty much anything that supports the CalDAV protocol will be able to sync with your own cloud box.
Right. So if you're like me and you have your calendar in Thunderbird and you want to sync it to your phone, then you can do that yourself instead of having to rely on something like Google Calendar. It
also offers up, things like contacts. And so what you're seeing here is a potential complete solution now for mobile users that want something that Google Docs, or Google Sync or iCloud or RIM offers, but, roll it yourself.
If that actually got all the way out there, and then you had LibreOffice as well, you could entirely replace Google, right? If it's got your contacts and your Google Calendar, you don't have to use Google's fake Exchange sync. You'd have Google Docs. You'd have the Google is launching their cloud music service, or Amazon's, or whichever one you're replacing.
Yeah.
And, the iCloud, and, you can replace most cloud services with something that you control.
Yeah.
Or, and even if they take something like OwnCloud and there's a service provider that will provide you with the private OwnCloud on a server, so it'll be higher speed than what you have at your connection at home.
Oh, absolutely, right? Yeah. Let's talk about something that's kind of interesting, because last week's episode, we talked about VirtualBox. We covered VirtualBox tips for beginners and more advanced users. And go check that out if you haven't seen it yet, because we're giving you a VirtualBox machine at the end of this episode. Anyways, they had a bit of a rocky weekend. They got in a punch fight with the Linux kernel developers. Apparently, there seems to be a little bad blood, is what I'm reading in this. But anyways, the Linux kernel developers have labeled the VirtualBox driver as tainted crap.
Yep.
It's crap, they say.
It's causing random memory corruption and a bunch of other things. And it's just causing a giant flood of bug reports. And, when they drill down into it every time, it seems to be VirtualBox's fault.
That's too bad. Yeah, the Red Hat's Dave Jones finally threw down the ban hammer and labeled it as tainted junk. He said, even though this VirtualBox driver is open source, it's under the GPL, actually.
Yep.
The quality of this driver is quite poor and continues to cause issues for many users. In particular, kernel developers have become frustrated that this virtualization driver is causing random memory corruptions, like you were saying, and specifically cited in corrupt linked lists, corrupt page tables, and just plain weird crashes.
Yep.
That's too bad.
Really weird things happen when you start overwriting different areas of memory that are in use in different places and so on.
That's a shame, though, because I just hope it's not like an Oracle, like, bad blood kind of thing. Because VirtualBox is so great for end users, And sometimes I do feel like the kernel team, now I'm not saying they shouldn't have done this, because if it's causing issues, then, yank it. But I just sometimes do feel like there is a bit of a disconnect with the upstream kernel guys and the end users. And you start to get the feeling, you start to realize that you do live in a reality where the enterprise does drive the kernel a bit, or primarily. And we're just along for the ride to some extent. And every now and then I wish we could say, what about us? What about the people? I like having
a lot of
VirtualBox.
enterprises use VirtualBox. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point.
But, VirtualBox's driver isn't actually part of the Linux kernel. It's separate. But basically now it's marked along with a bunch of like staging and beta drivers so that bug reports about it won't be accepted.
Yeah.
In some cases.
Right. They can just say, no,
or
you can't.
Just be like flagged as low priority. It's like,
this is tainted
a
crap.
VirtualBox problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, it's not a problem in the kernel. It's a problem in the driver. And
they're not going to fix it because it's
up
not
to
their
somebody else to fix.
Yeah. Not our problem.
With it being, GPL, we can hope somebody will fix it. But it's
true.
Because it's, the kernel driver for virtualization, it's, one of the most complicated things out there. And
I'm sure, yeah.
So it's not just any developer can sit there and hack on it.
Yeah, it's probably one of the harder things, right?
Yep.
All right,
especially when it's bugs that aren't easy to reproduce.
Speaking of things that are a pain in the butt and hard, is a lot of people out there have these Android devices or smartphones that are assigned to them by their employer. They only want to carry a single device. They don't want to have to carry their employer's phone and their personal phone. But the issue is you want to put personal stuff on your phone, but you also have work stuff on your phone. Yep. And there's been different solutions that have been kicked around that we haven't really seen hit the marketplace yet.
Right, I remember VMware wanted to do virtualization on your phone so that you could do work in a virtual box that or in a virtual machine that the business could, have, remotely destroyed if you got fired or whatever.
Right.
And just would be encrypted and would just keep it completely separate from what you do on the phone yourself.
Right. Yeah. And so, like you mentioned, VMware's tried to have a solution for this, but they really haven't gotten it to market yet in a way that I've seen, at least not directly.
Especially, with ARM phones, right? When you have an ARM processor, you're not doing i386 virtualization.
Right. Yeah. So AT&T, though, is shipping something called dual accounts with Android now. And at first, it kind of sounded like maybe like a login screen, like you'd get to your Android phone and log in, and it would either log into your corporate account or it would log into your personal account. But it's actually, here's the description. AT&T is adopting technology that gives a person with an Android device 2 user profiles, enabling company email and other data to reside in an encrypted partition separate from the user's apps, games, and unfettered web browsing. AT&T is calling this feature Toggle, and it plans to release it later this year. Toggle is just a regular app. Once installed, creates its own encrypted desktop under the control of the IT company bosses. Toggle is rebranding of an app developed by Intrepoid, which continues to develop its own version. AT&T happens to think this move will encourage smartphone adoption in the enterprise. Interestingly, Apple's current version of iOS and app guidelines exclude multiple profiles on one device. Dun, dun, dun. Apple can't be in the enterprise. Oh, my God. Throw that in there for no reason at the end. All right. So this is kind of an interesting thing. It still kind of sounds like virtualization, though, doesn't it?
Kind of. It's just partitioning more. It's like it's kind of like a FreeBSD jail. It's just a CH root kind of idea.
Oh boy, they've got a fancy website. Yeah, so they refer to it as profiles on their site here, and it's funny because they show the work one is just this really nice, slimmed down. Also, it looks older. It looks like an older version of Android, but it says it's downloadable. This works on any phone running Froyo or up.
Well, I think it makes sense because especially businesses that right now are kind of stuck with BlackBerry because they need that IT control over the phone.
Yeah.
And a lot of smartphones don't offer that. So with AT&T rolling out
I hate that crap.
An Android where, the company, if they pay for your phone or whatever, they can control what you can do with the business side of the phone, but you can still use the phone for your regular everyday phone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can install games and apps, but if you get spyware on there, it can't read the encrypted business data. If you lose your phone, encrypted business data, and, allowing, IT to restrict what you can do with it, it might actually lead to quite a bit of more adoption for Android.
Maybe. We'll see, sir. I bet you're probably right on that part. Now, was there any other stories we were going to cover?
You know, with the iPhone purposely not offering it and RIM not doing so well.
Right. Yeah, talk about RIM not doing well. Geez, they've had a bad week. Now, did you... I feel like we're forgetting a story. Was there anything else we threw at the news docket? Or was that VirtualBox... I think that VirtualBox might have been the last one. I wanted to jump back to the OwnCloud. If anybody out there has an OwnCloud success story that they would like to share on the Linux Action Show, get a hold of me, Chris at jupiterbroadcasting.com, or hit me up on Twitter. I am twitter.com/Chris Elias. You can see it there in the lower third there. And I would like to get your success story because if I hear from a few people saying that OwnCloud rocks for them, oh boy, I might go for it. I might make the jump.
Nice.
All right, Alan, is that everything we had? You think? I think we're good. All right, Alan. Well, that's all the news for this week. And it is time to review 2 distro releases this week. That's right, 2 distro releases this week. Kubuntu 11.10 and Ubuntu 11.10. Now we're going to take a little different track. We'll focus more on Kubuntu because we've already done an Ubuntu 11.10 review a couple of weeks ago. You can go check that preview out. But it's here. The new Ubuntu 11.10 is here. It's here, Alan. It's here. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
And we're going to kick the tire. We kicked the tires and we're going to tell you what we thought. Now, before we go, I wanted to make a couple of notes. First of all, if you haven't got a chance to play with Ubuntu, they did something kind of interesting. I think I have a link here somewhere. It is, did you see this like live HTML view, usable, the online tour they called it. Here it is. Oh. Have you seen this, Alan? It is a completely web-based implementation of, it's not exactly accurate, but if you're watching the video version, it's booting up right now. And this is like a fake Unity tour that you can take that looks like it's really... So you can kind of explore the desktop through your web browser. This is all in a web browser.
Kind of get the idea before you commit to like doing a live CD.
This is one of the first times I've seen this. Here, I'll throw a link in the live chat room because I got some people there and they're saying, what? I've never seen that. So there's that. So Ubuntu 11.10, it's an interesting beast because a lot of times when we start to review a Linux distro, I look for that big feature that we need to focus on, right? That big thing is going to do, ButterFS support or whatever it might be. And Ubuntu 11.10 had some big features. It had, the new Linux kernel, 3.0 something, and it has a GNOME 3.2 in there, and it also has the latest KDE 4.7 or whatever it is there. Yep. And the reality is, though, and I saw a lot of other reviewers struggling with this, and I kind of laughed to myself because I know their pain, but what it really is a lot of the development time and a lot of the development focus in this release went into Unity. And Unity is just a hard thing to quantify. Unity is, in this release, it's faster. It's more stable.
And it's just smoother. Like a lot of the rough edges have been filed down.
Exactly. It's a perfect point. It's smoother, more elegant, more polished. But that's hard to put like a bullet point on a web page that says this. Yep. And I think this is going to be a problem that Canonical and Ubuntu will struggle with for a while because Unity still has some work to be done on it. And that's where they're going to focus. And so it's going to be hard to get these buzzword features in there that get people really excited. So sometimes I think this release sounds a little flat when you look at all of its features on the surface.
It's also just a side effect of this 6-month release cycle, is that if nothing important happens for 6 months, then your release is not that useful.
I can see that. I mean, I do like the idea of steadily marching towards progress, though. So I see.
Right, but doing a release for the sake of the calendar isn't necessarily useful.
I think they are I think they're a member of that philosophy where you have to just set a date and ship. But that said, this release turned out pretty good. I think we'll focus a little bit more on Kubuntu here in a moment. But I just had to see if there's any other thoughts I wanted. One thing I thought that might help was since they are spending so much time and making Unity sort of this polished product that in the end will make them one of the most unique Linux desktops. It's really going to be their competitive edge if they pull it off. And, if you're a Unity hater before, I would say give it another try. It might be worth checking out, but here's the thing. If they don't start quantifying the improvements in Unity, I think people will get a little bored and feel like Ubuntu is sitting still. And I almost wonder if Ubuntu adopted, like, this version of Ubuntu is shipping with Unity version 2, and then, version 12.04 of Ubuntu will be shipping with Unity 3, and Unity 3 includes all of these cool improvements. Better memory usage, faster response time, new search, new organization, badges on your docs. That
incremental improvements like that of just speed and performance and memory utilization and so on those are just what you expect from every version incrementation.
Especially when you look at a whole distro, when you look at the distro as a whole. But if they broke out Unity as an individual component that like was this product that ran on top of Ubuntu, then they could be a little more granular about the new features and the new fixes they've done there. And then when they have the bullet points on the Ubuntu page, would be like, features Unity 3, click here for more information, and boom, here's all the cool stuff about Unity. And then that, I think, would help sort of build more buzz. They would have to do something
else, otherwise their feature list would be one bullet point.
Right, and especially when, otherwise, if they're focusing most of their attention on it, that's all they're going to have. But, all right, I digress. Let's talk a little bit about Kubuntu, because this is the KDE spin of Ubuntu 11.10.
Ubuntu, yeah.
Yeah, and this is your first time ever using Kubuntu, right?
First time in a couple of years, yeah.
Okay, same here. First time in a couple of years for me, too. Now, Alan is a longtime KDE guy, though, right?
Yes.
Okay. That's why I was glad to have you on here doing this Kubuntu review, because I am not a longtime KDE guy. But I've kind of been like in this no man's land where GNOME 3 is not doing it for me and Unity's not doing it for me. So I'm like looking at KDE and I'm going, it's kind of that or XFCE, you know? That's kind of what I'm thinking these days. So I wanted to be really impressed by Kubuntu 11.10. You know what I mean? Like I wanted to go and be like, yeah, I could live here. And I'm not saying that's not the case, but I think kind of like you, Alan, I was a little like, that's it?
Yeah, like I noticed, I was obviously comparing it to what I normally use on like my media center, which is FreeBSD, and I just manually add a KDE package.
Like stock KDE, right?
Yeah, and it's just stock out of the box KDE. And honestly, the Kubuntu looks almost identical. They have a couple of things, like there's shortcuts to install Firefox and so on. But, you know, there wasn't, I was like, well, what makes this a distribution and not just Linux with Kubuntu on top?
It kind of is. You know, it's Ubuntu core with KDE on top. Kubuntu's always kind of been just sort of the stock implementation.
Right. It obviously doesn't get as much attention as regular Ubuntu, and so
that's the immediate impression that I get, is that it's a little attention hungry. Like, you know, when you first log in, the first thing you get is a couple of error messages. At least I did on the two systems I loaded it on, one VirtualBox and one physical machine.
The VirtualBox you sent me didn't throw any errors. It's
because I'd already cleared them out.
Ah, right.
Yeah. But the overall impression that left me was a little appreciated, not underappreciated, maybe a little undercared, but with good intent. And this KDE is a good, clean, super fast implementation.
Yes.
And they're including the new OpenGL KWin acceleration experimental stuff. So you can get your KWin effects supercharged by OpenGL and cook that graphics card for yourself. The other thing they did, which I thought was kind of interesting here, is they have a very basic stock implementation, but then they have sort of like a kickoff-like menu. And I'll be straight with you, Alan. I do not like this kickoff menu. Like, oh, here's for example. This is sort of, I think, a KDE problem, but again, it really chaps my hide. Okay, you see on my screen here, there is utilities and there is system. There's two icons there, right? The one labeled utilities has a terminal icon. The one labeled system has a gear. If I click on utilities, there is no terminal in this screen. Okay? Now, when I go back, the button to go back on the side of the menu is now gone. And the only way to go back is by going up and hitting this little text up here. Not a big deal, but it's definitely a workflow change. And it was one that caught me by surprise a little bit. Now, if I go into system, and by the way, if you're watching the video version, that little tearing effect is just because I zoomed in. Now, if I go to system, there I can scroll down and find the terminal. It's just it's a little funky. And it's just one of those little...
pinned to the favorites list by default?
Oh, I don't know. I have it pinned to my favorites list. But my point is that it's a level of attention that's just, it's missed. It's refinement that I think if somebody sat down and thought, the first time I ever see this menu, this is what I'm going to think to do. And it just seems like that thought process hasn't been done. And the problem is, Alan, is I made that same complaint a year and a half ago. And it's just kind of silly that in a year and a half's time, nobody's looked at such a small little thing like that. And the removal of an obvious way to go back.
Isn't it?
No. It's the kicker menu in KDE. That menu stays the same regardless of the theme. And the kicker menu, I just think what my issue with the kicker menu altogether is you have this incredibly slick-looking, very purty KDE plasma desktop with awesome new things that you can do with it and transparencies and cool graphical effects. And then I click this K menu, And I kind of feel like I'm in 1997 a little bit. It's better than that. I don't mean to be that harsh on it. It's definitely better, but it's not
very
great.
similar to like a Windows 7 start menu.
And I would love to see, and this is probably a pipe dream, but perhaps Canonical could recognize, perhaps, we'll see how this goes. Maybe this will change as Unity continues to get refined, but perhaps Canonical could recognize there's a large contingent of Ubuntu users who would switch to KDE that would, because they don't want to use Unity, if their KDE spin got a little more love, just like maybe they could innovate in that menu a little bit. I also was surprised, no Ubuntu One integration at all. No Ubuntu One in Kubuntu. And while not a big deal, I don't really use Ubuntu One very heavily. If I was heavily invested in Ubuntu One on the GNOME side, and then I switch to KDE, and there's no Ubuntu One to be found, obviously I can fix that, but it just seems like a disconnect. It just doesn't seem like it's a product from the same company who's making all these other services. And why wouldn't they leverage that? Another example is the Ubuntu Software Center, not in the Kubuntu store. It does have a compelling, interesting package manager, which is, if you go to computer menu, you can then find it. I've heard complaints people are having a hard time finding that. They have the Muon Software Center. I might be getting that wrong, but it's not quite a Synaptic replacement, not quite an Ubuntu Software Center replacement. It's kind of a hybrid. It's a really nice little Qt-based repository manager to oppository. I think that's something else, to find apps and install stuff.
Yeah.
But it's not, again, it's not the Ubuntu Software Center.
Right.
And I've bought apps in the Ubuntu Software Center. And now I load Kubuntu. That just doesn't seem like it makes sense to me.
Yep.
And if I can get it loaded in Mint, why can't I have it in Kubuntu? Mint almost seems more integrated at that point. You know what I mean? And it's not even from the same people.
Right. And
any other impressions?
Well, Ryoki in the chat room was saying that the KDE reminds him too much of the Windows Arrow interface. But at the same time, I think that's where a lot of attraction to it could be, right? Where you have a lot of users coming from Windows and an interface that makes them feel a little more at home and a little less like everything is different.
There's some components actually that I think are pretty inspired, I'll say, from OS 10, like the system settings stuff. Also in Ubuntu, very OS 10. It's fine though. It's functional. It's, control panel is a control panel.
I would say if you were coming from Windows, you would find KDE more like what you were used to than Unity or GNOME.
I agree. And and KDE is a very powerful desktop. The Dolphin file browser has become very good with as much support for some of the crazy stuff the Conqueror had back in the day, but without all of the bloat. I love it. And
it has this built-in little zoom thing, which is very handy.
Yeah, for the icons and stuff.
Yeah, well, remember we were talking about when we did the Ubuntu preview, some of the menus, the icons are huge for no reason.
Yes.
It's like you could zoom down so you could fit more on a page.
Yeah.
Or, for example, I'm doing this, one of the main places I use KDE is on my television. And so sometimes, if I'm sitting far away, I want the text to be bigger or the icons to be bigger.
That is nice to have that flexibility, isn't it?
Yeah.
The last thing I think I'll mention, unless you have any other thoughts on Kubuntu, Alan, is it comes with Reconq. That's a Qt browser based on WebKit. It's gotten a little more feature complete in this release. I had a couple of people, I guess it was on Google Plus, that said they're having crashing with it. I haven't experienced it, but to be honest with you, I already loaded Chrome. So,
and it comes with a nice shortcut to install Firefox right in the menu.
Yes. Now, KDE 4.7 is one hell of a desktop. Let's be honest. If you are struggling with Unity and GNOME 3, go download our VirtualBox. It'll be in the show notes and play with this. There's a lot of little elegant things like, I just clicked on the clock and up comes this really fantastic calendar that is just already packed full of good information that's nice to have. And then gets augmented by your calendar. And check out this other toy here. If you click on the network interface, this is stuff that long-term KDE people already know. But remember, I'm kind of looking at this as a KDE noob a little bit and just kind of appreciating it. I've seen some of this stuff, but I still really appreciate this. Check this one out, though. If I click on the network interfaces icon and then I go click on the interface that I have active, it brings up this real-time analytics about my network adapter right there in the menu. I have transfer rate bar graphs, my IP address, my connection speed, my MAC address, the driver that it's using, my IP address. It's beautiful. And that's so nice. When I'm transferring files all the time, I love to see my throughput. And when I'm on Wi-Fi, I like to kind of know what I'm getting. It's stuff like this KDE is truly becoming the desktop for professionals. Like on Unity, and I'll save this for the Ubuntu review, but I'll give this now. I find it hard to manage multiple terminal windows in Unity, and I don't like a lot what they're doing. In KDE 4.7, it's like, oh, you want to run 8 terminal windows at once? Here's 5 different ways you can do that, and they're all awesome. Like one of them, oh, wait, you know what? I'm going to save it. I'm going to save it as an app pick. I got one of the terminal options in KDE, you got to add an app, but it is so slick. You old school gamers, you probably already know what I'm talking about. But KDE just really seems like, boom, we're here. You want this stuff. You've got it. You want to manage your Windows however you want. You want to have multiple desktops. You want to have all this stuff integrated. You totally can. And in some extent, because KDE 4. Whatever is so well done and so well integrated, all the KDE 4 stuff just talks to each other. They almost get away with not doing a ton of the integration work that the Ubuntu mainline project has to do to make all that GNOME stuff talk together. So in some respect, they almost get away with it, but I think it's starting to show. And I'm just starting not to quite see where Kubuntu fits when you have things out there like OpenSUSE, who are generally almost always deliver a fantastic, amazing KDE desktop experience that really is a competitive, stands by itself experience.
Right.
Like Ubuntu One is sort of like, here's the house, now you supply all the furnishing, and you make sure that everything...
Right, it's a secondary project for them, and so it just doesn't get the same level of attention.
Yeah.
Whereas with OpenSUSE, it's their primary project, right?
Yep.
But also the copying files, like multiple sets of files in KDE, has a nice system where you can like pause and resume and track the progress and just, if you're doing a bunch of concurrent file operations, it's quite handy.
Yes, the file transfer is very handy. You're right about that, Al. Now, what do you think? Should we move on to Ubuntu 11.10, the Unity version of Ubuntu? Okay. Now, this is probably the one that people, for the most part, are the most interested in. And one thing we should mention is Unity is a 3D accelerated environment with transparencies and all this kind of stuff. The big thing they've done in 11.10 is they have made a serious 2D alternative. If you don't have 3D acceleration, you almost don't even know that you're not using Unity 3D at first. There starts to be little tells here and there that you can tell. And here's what's interesting, Alan, is it's Qt based. The 2D version is completely Qt based, whereas the other one's GTK based and a bunch of other crap. And they've really gone feature parity. I'd like to know on the back end how they're kind of accomplishing that. And so that's a big nod.
Yeah, and 2D support like that is very important if you're doing virtual machine.
Yeah, like you want Tyler's saying
interface in the virtual machine.
Tyler's agreeing with you right there in the chat room. He says, Chris, I love how the 2D Unity is so consistent with Unity 3D. The differences are very minor. And Alan, I agree with you. It really makes a big difference for virtualization. I didn't mean to step on your point because that's a very excellent one. So also, Thunderbird is replacing Evolution. I know some of you out there in the corporate world who use Exchange might run into a snafu with that. And they've also included... Say again?
I use Thunderbird extensively, and I'm very happy with it.
Yeah, Thunderbird's a great product. They also have included Deja Vu backup, but no tie-in with Ubuntu One, which I thought was kind of funny. Why wouldn't they want me to back up to Ubuntu One and burn through storage so I have to buy more? Seems like they would have... Maybe they will. Maybe that's planned to be integrated in the future, and they just didn't have time for this release. Let's see. I got several complaints about multi-monitor support still sucking. Haven't tried it myself. I've had so many issues with it in the past that I've kind of given up in my reviews because I usually get so frustrated with it that I start to get cranky about my review. I don't know if you had a chance to try any multi-monitor stuff, but I heard from several different people that it wasn't working very well. All right, let's take a look here. Let me get my Ubuntu 11.10 machine fired up. Now, I'm not really planning to release this one because this one has all my private information on there and personal stuff. So you'll just have to take my word for it. But both of these releases, I mean, they boot in seconds. They are very, very fast. All right. So let's get started here with Ubuntu 11.10, because one of the first things you'll notice is they have this new fancy Unity. It's not Unity-based, but it's a Unity look-alike login manager. We covered it before on Linux Action Show. It has a very consistent look. It's, here we go. So we'll get logged in. Now, one of the things I'd say that still kind of bothers me is I'm still not totally comfortable with this sidebar launcher that's on here. It needs to be a little more customizable, and the Ubuntu folks seem to be a little hard set on not letting you move that and do things like that. I'd like to see that change. But overall, just a few notes is, when you're looking at this, I think what you're starting to see now is the direction Unity is going, and I think they're widening its appeal a lot more. I think there's a lot larger of an audience now for this release of Ubuntu. I think the 11.04 version made a lot of people upset, and it turned a lot of people away from using Unity.
Yep.
I would like to encourage that if you're one of those people, at least check this out. In my estimation, though, it's still not quite ready for me. But I think if I spent a lot of time with it, I think maybe I could get used to it. I'm just not sure.
I think they might have pulled the trigger there a little too quick on the switch to Unity.
Yeah, I would love to have seen this be the 11.04 release.
Right.
And then one more iteration. It still feels like I'm giving something up when I use Unity. And a big part of it is I think maybe this is like the Linux free spirit in me. I just feel like they're sort of artificially limiting certain things, like for the sake of claiming simplicity, when in reality I don't agree. Like I'll give you an example. All of the menus on your applications are moved off of the application bar itself and put up in the top bar of the desktop and then hidden until you mouse over them.
Yeah.
They say it's for simplicity. They say it keeps things clean and it looks better on a notebook display.
If you have a lack of screen real estate, maybe. But even most notebooks now have giant resolutions.
I don't grok it. I don't understand it. I don't know if you can see in the video version here.
It's like, so, okay, that hides the scary menus from people that don't know what they're doing. But hello, I'd like to, use the menu to get some work done.
Now, JPViewer1 in the chat room says he loves it. It gives a very minimalistic look to his desktop. Now, if you're looking at the video version, I'm going to take the mouse to the top of my screen, and you'll see all of a sudden Firefox's file menus and edit menus will show up. They're just there all of a sudden, but they're not there now. And they don't always fit properly. And also, the browser's close windows have gone up to the top right. Now, you'll notice, though, the browser isn't displaying for some reason. So I have to go up there and try to mess with it, but I don't, without that file bar there, and when the Firefox browser isn't displaying on my desktop, this is a very confusing situation.
Yep. And
all I can see is that I can see Firefox has started, but I don't see any window, and I don't see any file menu stuff up there. So what indication? I mean, this seems a little like a broken implementation, and I'm not seeing what the benefit is of hiding that stuff, or at least giving me the option. And I can't quite put my finger on it, and I apologize because I know these guys work hard on this, but it feels like a janky implementation. It feels like it's hacked, and that doesn't feel elegant. And on the rest of Unity, where it's getting pretty polished and starting to feel a little on the elegant side, a little bit by its sort of more restrictive nature, there's what does work is done really well. And then you get to this feature here, and it just feels half-baked and ill-conceived. And I know they've defended it, and I know they've been railed on it. It just still doesn't click for me.
But yeah, it's like I'm less worried about what it looks like and more worried about how much work I can get in what amount of time. So every time they do something like this to make it simpler for people but make it more work for me, it just drives me nuts.
Now, I believe, of course, that you could always go the GNOME 3.2 route on this, because what they've done is they have, you don't have to stick with Unity. Of course, you could always go Ubuntu or Ubuntu or different distro altogether. But this does ship with GNOME 3.2. So if you wanted to log out of Unity, you could log into a GNOME 3.2 session, and there's not a ton, but there's quite a bit these days of little mods and extensions and things you can do to GNOME 3 to kind of bring it a little bit more back in line with GNOME 2. Like you can add a more traditional menu, you can get some of your applets back and things like that. It's like you could kind of start to see where maybe GNOME 3 could kind of reach a middle ground. Yep. But it's been fun comparing these two things with this on one side and Kubuntu on the other side. KDE 4.7 feels more traditional with a lot of new stuff in it, whereas Unity feels like it's sort of a teenager at this point, and it maybe has a good potential future, but it could also go hang out with the wrong crowd and end up just being a burnout. And I just don't know where it's going in this direction. Whereas with KDE, I have a pretty good idea where it's going. Same with XFCE. Not so much with GNOME. So it's kind of an interesting times, Alan. It's interesting times. Any other thoughts? Anything else you want to wrap up?
On Twitter this week, I was following a couple people that were having trouble with Unity and were just upset and wanted to go back to GNOME 2. And so I found a little tutorial on how to install the GNOME 2 package from apt and switch your desktop back to a traditional GNOME 2.
On 11.10, you can go GNOME 2? Yeah. That's great. Yeah. There you go. So you see, there's always hope out there, everyone.
Right. That's... if that's what you're used to, and you're like me, and you just hate change for the sake of change, you want just stuff. Why does it have to be different?
I would love to see Ubuntu with Ubuntu One get to the point where I log into Ubuntu One, do a few things, accept a few things, and then within about 20 minutes, 90% of all of my desktop settings are back. The app list of my installed applications available for me to install if I want. I'd love to see the one comp system they have with Ubuntu One expanded to more applications and support more things. I think going forward, Alan, you need more than just a pretty desktop on top of Linux, and Ubuntu is going in that right direction with Ubuntu One, Ubuntu Music, and all the cloud stuff. It's just not there yet, and I've kind of been saying that for the last 2 releases. I think that's, at the same time, every release they get a little closer every 6 months. So 12.04 might have a lot of my kind of little bit nigglies answered, and I think if you were up for it, you could probably switch over to Unity and find it to be a usable environment. So be interesting if some of you give it a shot. All right, Alan.
Yep.
Well, I think that's all we have to say about Ubuntu. That's the Linux Action Show's review of Kubuntu and Ubuntu 11.10. And that brings us to the end of this week's broadcast. Thanks, Alan, for joining me for another week. Of course. Now, I want to address something. I know you say it's not that I wasn't, but the chat room says during the break that I was hating too much on Ubuntu, that we were negative. And I will say this. A, that might be a little true. There is a lot of pressure I feel out there to give a more fair review. I feel like the viewers out there will hold me to the fire if I'm overly nice to Ubuntu. And I also feel like a lot of the reviewers give them a free pass. I want to be clear, though. I think a lot of it comes because Ubuntu was like the king. They were at the top, and they still are. I mean, our stats prove that. And but the change to Unity is such a dramatic change that it could be such a huge fumble for them if it's not executed properly, that we look at that with very skeptical eyes and just want to make sure that we point out the areas we need improvement, because I think, honestly, there's a little bit of a stake of ownership, at least on my part, to make Ubuntu better in any way that I am capable of doing, because if it's awesome, that'd be my preferred platform of choice because it works well for me. I'm a long-time Debian guy. So, I will say in closing, my review of Ubuntu is this. 11.10 is the best Ubuntu that's been released in a couple of years. I don't know if it's the best ever, but it's trending in that direction, and it's a very good product. I would just like to see a few of my quibbles answered, and I would like to know if anyone out there tries to stick to Unity this time and it works for them. But give it a couple of weeks, because I've tried it. I've tried it twice now. For the preview, I ran it for a month, and then for this, I ran it for a week, and I still could not find myself changing to it, and I want to. So let me know if that works out there for you. And I'll say in closing, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Leave a comment wherever you're watching this on the overall, your overall thoughts on either Kubuntu or Ubuntu. And one last plug for our awesome Linux Action Show subreddit at reddit.com/r/Linux Action Show. Go fuel the show with your comments, your votes, your submissions. A great place to submit questions, show suggestions, or links. It doesn't just have to be a news story. You can put all kinds of stuff in there. And we also rock that thing for TechSnap, don't we?
We do. And we're going to put up the Kubuntu install you did as a torrent for a VirtualBox application you can download. And so notes. I'll be seeding that at 50 megabits per second. So.
Hey, wow. That'll be nice. That's a good initial seed there, Alan.
Yep.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Linux Action Show. Now, you do know this show is a weekly show, don't you? We do it live over at jblive.tv at 10 a.m. Pacific, and then it's released later on in the evening over at jupiterbroadcasting.com for pretty much any device and format you'd ever want. So go get that and subscribe to an RSS feed, would you? Would you do that for us? Sheesh. And I almost hate to ask this, but if you are an iTunes user, and I know we have some of you out there, do us a solid and go rate and comment if you enjoy the show in iTunes. If you don't, well, you can still comment, but maybe don't rate. I don't know. Honestly, Jupiter Broadcasting viewers and listeners are not huge iTunes people, especially the Linux Action Show. Yeah. But I'm dealing with reality here. I see some of you using it, and since nobody wants to admit it, we could really use the hookup. If you're one of the people out there using iTunes, it's kind of up to you, because nobody else is doing it, and it really helps.
Yes, please.
Kind of feels dirty though. So maybe if you could make like a little sly jab in there about Apple too while you're doing something smart and clever, so that way they don't remove it. That'd make everybody feel a little better. I think that'd be a good way to go. That way we feel a little less compromised. Right, Alan? You always want to make sure you're keeping that bar high. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Linux Action Show, and we'll see you right back here next week.